Good morning. Yeah, okay, we are here to do this thing. So there is time allotted at the end for questions, and we may not get to question time because I'm sort of inflationary about my talk time, but I'm almost 6 feet tall and I have a bright pink mohawk, so if you cannot find me and ask your question later, you're not trying hard enough. So don't worry, we'll get you answered. And I'm gonna move my mic because it's making a noise. Sorry, it'll be over in a minute. Tiny distraction now or terrible later? Yes. Okay, so we're going to talk about garbage collection. So when I proposed this talk, I have no memory of proposing this talk, and I think I might have been, I don't know, sleep deprived from children or something. But it turns out that what I wanted to talk about once I found my notes was there's a bunch of stuff in Python that I totally want to steal from you guys and use in technical writing. And here's the stuff that I found especially useful. Sorry, not guys, people. Clicking. You worked a minute ago. Fine, be that way. So here's the source of all planning. And I think it's really important for us to understand this because I don't think we stop and think about how we know things. And you recognize this from Dick Cheney talking about unknown unknowns. So let's talk a little bit about how we know things. Known is stuff that you know how to do, and you know how to do it, and it's so automatic you don't even think about it, like driving a car, or frying an egg, or compiling your code stuff. It's just automatic. It's a known. You don't have to worry about it. A known unknown is something that you don't have the information on, but you know how to get it. For instance, right this minute, none of you know what your blood pressure is, but you could find out in under half an hour. So you know what it is, and you know how to get it, and you have a plan for what to do about it once you have it. That's your known unknown. So you would think, just reversing the words would not reverse the meaning, but it does in this case. Your unknown known is things that exist and are information, but you don't have them yet. And frequently, documentation falls into this category, because until you need it, documentation exists in this sort of uncertainty state where it may be written and it may not, but you don't know because you don't care, because you haven't had a problem yet, and you're not pissed off enough to read the documentation yet. And really, thank you. The only time people read documentation is pretty much when they're already angry. So unknown unknowns. This is the thing that makes your projects go sideways, because suddenly something happened that you didn't expect and you didn't know to plan for, and you don't really have a recovery plan for. And unknown unknowns are the trickiest kind of data, and I don't have a good way to address them, because if we had a good way to address them, they wouldn't be unknown. But I want you to think about how you're getting information and how you're holding it, because the way you have information in your head is different than how your user has information in their head. So your known, I know how to compile this, I know how this works, is different than my unknown. What do you mean homebrew? Are we making beer on my Macintosh? I am unclear. So, what is your known and your unknown known? What is the one for your customers? And have you thought about the difference? Like, please think about what it is you find automatic, like Git. It's not automatic, it's not actually easy, it makes me cry, and my next career is going to be a therapist specializing in Git issues. Right? Who would go to a therapist who specializes in Git issues, right? Yeah, I think I could make bank. So, yeah, that too. So what don't you know but can figure out? What is that for your customers? Like, what is it that they can figure out from your documentation even though they don't know it now? And what is going to bite your ass? Again, you can't tell what's going to bite your ass because it's unknown, but you know, because you've worked on software for more than 3 months, that something is going to bite your ass. And it's going to be unexpected and unpredictable, and you're just going to feel terrible about the fact that it happened. And you're going to have to go to your boss and say, yeah, we slipped because, and the explanation will sound ridiculous no matter what it is. So I'm here to show you that you know more than you think about documentation, since very few of us can afford to hire technical writers for our projects, especially if they're projects of love. We can't hire all the writers we need, and you're on your own, bucko. And I want to help you out with that because this is my mission in life, to teach developers to write a little bit better. So actually, let me take a moment to encourage you to hire a writer. It turns out that a lot of people think hiring somebody is like getting married. Like there's a long process, and you go through some counseling, and you make a contract, and you're committed to this person. That is not how it works for technical writing. Not always, and not with everyone. What you can actually do is like date around. You're like, you take this project and see how it goes. Or you take this part and do a little bit of it. Or I don't need a full-time writer because I only have 4 devs. Can you work 10 hours a week? So it's not an all or nothing proposition. You don't have to hire a full-time with benefits, awesome, sits in your cube and talks to you every day technical writer. You could just, find somebody on an app and do better than being alone. But consider at least hiring someone to build out your structure so that your developer can drop something into. It's easy to answer a question if it's there in the outline, and it's really hard to generate the outline and project what it is people need to know. So if you're going to hire a writer for one thing, hire them to build you a structure and an outline. So I was looking at how Python thinks, and it has this core set of concepts. I want to say no documentation is actually better than bad documentation, because no documentation is frustrating and people will Google for the answer. Wrong documentation will make people walk away from your project forever. They're like, wow, you totally blew up my build environment, and there's like little flames coming out of my computer, and your documentation is wrong. Actually, in technical writing, we have 3 graded sets of how important something is for you to notice. So we have note, and that says, you should probably pay attention to this. And we have warning, warning, you might lose data, is really what warning means. Like there's some chance that you'll lose some data. And caution is, you could kill somebody with this. And if you look at it, a well-structured document will not say caution unless there's actually like, please do not cross the streams level stuff going on. Any documentation is better than no documentation. So that seems to conflict with the wrong documentation, but there's a hierarchy. It's like wrong documentation, no documentation, anything at all. Like one long-ass wiki page is better than no documentation. So don't wait until you can get it right. Deliver minimum viable something, because otherwise people are not going to be able to use your product. Strongly typed documentation is better than random words. So strongly typed documentation has a structure built into every topic, and it tells you what it's supposed to be. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about researching Python was looking at how it's dynamic, but also strongly typed. Like you can define anything, but once you've defined it, your stuff has to fit in that definition. There's no like sprawling across buckets. Or I could have misunderstood. But that's what the technical documentation for Python says. So the first thing I'm going to steal from y'all is garbage collection. This is genius. So there's an iterator that goes through your code and says, hey, is this attached to anything? Is anything using this? Have I seen it before? And it marks it every time it goes through. Not being used. I've seen this before. And eventually it drops things out the bottom. It just collects the garbage and it says, nobody's using this, it's trash, we don't need to keep it. That's amazing, because so much documentation accretes. Like have you ever cleaned out your grandparents' house? And you're like, I don't even know what a merchant's green stamp is, but it's at the bottom of this pile. Your documentation gets like that faster than you think. But if we have automated garbage collection, that doesn't happen. It's awesome. So here's the cool thing about garbage collection. It allocates memory for new objects. And it isn't just like physical space. Documentation doesn't take up much like disk space. It's not big. But it does take up mental space. Like when you look at a project's documentation, and I thought about putting a screen capture from IBM, who I always pick on in documentation presentations, because if you look at an IBM documentation page, it's like wall of text that is all links, and you're never going to find anything. It's just terrifying. It's like, oh. So we're freeing up people's memory for how to think about things if we get rid of our documentation that we're not using. And we're identifying garbage objects. Remember how I said wrong documentation is the worst? If we could identify old documentation, it would lead us a long way toward identifying wrong documentation. Usually the easiest way for something to be wrong is for it just to be outdated. And we can reclaim memory because there's a need for us to be able to retrieve documentation. We can't just have it. We have to be able to find it. And we find things by searching for them, but every time we search, we're actually doing like a concordance. This is what modern indexing means. It's not actually an index, it's a concordance of all the places a word occurs in a set. And what that means is the more documentation you have, the bigger your set is and the more false positives you get. And anybody who has Googled a search term that's relatively common and ended up with a whole bunch of things completely unrelated to what they want totally understands what I'm talking about here. We have to reclaim some memory for that. In a world where data hoarding is a problem, I want garbage collection to be a thing. I have a dream Confluence plugin. Nobody has made it for me yet. I'm telling everybody at every conference about it. Someone will make it for me. I want a Confluence plugin where you install it, and over time, as the page gets older, the text gets lighter and lighter, until you hit a year, in which case the page is entirely white on white. Do not use this information. It's a year old and no one has touched it. It's wrong. We should just like fade it out. I want that kind of automated. Isn't that great? I talked to somebody who was thinking about doing this, but making it moldy instead of white with like CSS. I'm like, why can't we do this? Because we need to automate data dying. We have to give it a lifespan because otherwise we're going to drown. And if you haven't touched it in a year and nobody's read it in a year and nobody defends it, it's not useful. There are exceptions, but for the purposes of technical documentation. So I get paid by the anti-word. I actually have business cards that say this. And people laugh when I hand it to them, but it's a real thing. We all have all of this stuff clogging our systems. And even if you think you don't have any documentation, do you have error messages? Yeah, hopefully. Have you looked at your error messages since you created them? Are they still accurate to what's causing the error? And if you put a fix in it, which you should, all error messages should have a name, a cause, and a fix, right? You know this, right? No, okay. Time out. All error messages should have a name, a human Googleable name for the error, not like X0EFFJ, an actual name, and they should have a cause, like your file could not be found because it's not in the index. Whatever caused the error, you should be able to detect that. If you can't detect that, your error is probably too broad and you are flagging on too many things. And the last part of an error should be a fix, like reboot your Wi-Fi or search in this other place or reconfigure something, like whatever it takes to fix that error. You as the programmer probably know, since you wrote the error, the error catching. You probably know how to fix it, right? So why wouldn't you tell the poor bastard who got the error how to fix it? He's suffering here. So documentation is a constant battle of entropy. I lost like an hour last night looking at different domino fall gifs. It was not productive, but it was super satisfying. Documentation is a constant battle of entropy like any other code, so let's automate as much as we can so that we don't have to do work. I'm against work. All right, the next thing I'm stealing is dictionary get. So using a dictionary's get function allows you to automatically check whether a key is in a dictionary and return a default value if it isn't. That's the definition I found. I'm like, that applies to documentation in a really interesting way, and we actually talked about this yesterday. English is huge. English is giant, and this is probably my favorite quote. I left off the first part of it for those of you who know the quote. It's too big to be useful across the board, especially if you're an English language learner. I worked with a guy from Slovakia, and he was so delighted the day he learned the difference between that project is boring and that project is tedious. Native English speakers understand that boring is sort of a general case that includes tedious, but tedious implies that it's repetitive and it's going to keep going as opposed to being merely uninteresting. Like, that's a really key distinction in English, and we gloss over it a lot, but you should never be using words as nuanced as tedious in documentation that's meant for a broader audience, because it's just not useful to them. So if you have a dictionary get style function, you can use it to do simplified English. It's also called universal English, and we constrain the vocabulary down to something that someone could reasonably understand. Sort of like when we try and learn Chinese, we only learn a few thousand characters out of the thousands and thousands, because that's enough to get by with. We need to do simplified English as a similar thing. But it's really hard for people who don't do simplified English every single day and who are native English speakers to constrain their vocabulary that way. So if you have dictionary get, you can essentially run a linter against your documentation, and it'll be like, yeah, that's not a word that I know. That's not a normal people word. I have this problem all the time. I read a lot of Victorian literature, and I sometimes pop off with a phrase that has not been used in 2 centuries in any kind of common parlance, and then people have to look at me and be like, that's not a word we use anymore. It turns out you're time shifting again. So if we use simplified English, and if we automate using simplified English so it flags us when we do something that's out of the vocabulary, out of the dictionary, then we're going to be writing more accessible documentation and doing it easily, and it'll teach us, like, oh, I got an error on that word. I guess I should remember not to use that word in the future. The linter will still find it for you if you do, but you're training yourself as you go. So linters also search. Isn't that the best? I'm like, I'm using that idea. Linters search your stuff for known words that you want to flag or eliminate. And you can use this for code or language. And I'm part of the team for the Responsible Communication Style Guide. And one of our goals, if we can do it, is to make it not just so that we offer a style guide that says, please don't say these sexist, racist, horrible things, but runs a linter against what you're writing and flags things that are horrible and accidentally sexist and racist. Like if you call people guys, it's like, ding, hey, how about people? I think that would be super useful. So I'm gonna steal dictionary get. Other people who have used constrained vocabularies, how many of you read Green Eggs and Ham? How many of you realize it only has 50 unique words in it? There you go. I like the people who have looked this up. 50 unique words for an entire book that tells a comprehensive story. Constraining our language is not going to stop us from communicating. Unicode. Unicode is awesome. It came in Python 2, which has the same birthday I do, October 16th, although not 2000. Because you can tell, because I love Lisa Frank, and you had to be of a certain era, and it was before 2000. So Unicode is super important for lots of reasons, and I think we need to incorporate it more comprehensively into documentation and code, because here's the thing. Many of you probably knew Noreen. How many of you got their rant about getting their name tags wrong? Because they had Unicode in their name, and frequently, including at this conference, and Swinson had to go fix it, anything with an accent or a grave or anything, prints weirdly and comes out as a jumbled hash. If you support Unicode, you support everybody getting to have their own name. It's like a human rights issue. Nobody should have to abbreviate or simplify or reduce or minimize or change their name for the convenience of software. That's not okay. And if we're saying you have to change your name for the convenience of software, we're saying only people who are like me, who writes the software, are worth having a full human name. Unicode is super important. And I think it's going to be super interesting when we start naming children with emojis. You think this is an edge case? I think we are only a few years out because so many things now do support emojis. I just, like, how is it going to iterate? When we upgrade emojis, is your name going to change? Do you change that on the document? Do you have, like, heritage emojis? I don't know, but Unicode's going to be able to handle that because it's awesome. So typing, which is not like typing. I didn't think it was. I was smarter than that. So despite being dynamically typed, Python is also strongly typed, forbidding operations that are not well defined. Like you can't add a number to a string. And it outright says, yo, that's not good with me, rather than just like silently failing, which is a nice feature. So it turns out tech writing also has typing. We call it DITA, and it's like deep in the weeds of tech writing nerd. And it stands for Darwin Information Typing Architecture. And the way it's often implemented in our special nerd tech writing software is as a really rigid template that defines the types of information in sort of object-oriented buckets. So we have conceptual information, we have procedural information, and we have reference information. And you can't mix those up. And there's a heading 1, and a paragraph, and a heading 2, and a paragraph, and it's really set. Like there's nothing you can do that will change it. You can't add any style. You can't like randomly bold things. It's really rigid because it's backed sort of by XML. And it's very interesting to me because it means that you never skip things. Like if you are constrained by your software, by your tool to do the right thing, then it's a lot easier to do the right thing. So we use information typing to make sure that we are giving people consistent stuff and also that it's object-oriented. So basically, instead of writing books, for the last 15 or 20 years, documentation people have actually been writing what we call topics, and we rearrange them like Legos. So what we do is every page is page 1 is the theory. So we come in and we're like, okay, assuming somebody hit this from search, what do they need to know? Okay, well they just looked up how to set a variable. So I'm going to say the title is setting a variable, and I'm going to describe where you're going to do it, and the prerequisites, and the steps, and how you know it worked. And then I can rearrange that in as many ways as I want. Like sometimes it goes in the configuration guide, and sometimes it goes in the installation guide, and sometimes you leave it out altogether because it's not relevant to this guide. But we're not writing documents like books anymore. That's so 20th century. So our object orientation involves these libraries of snippets and topics, and we have to be able to track them somehow and make sure that they're cross-referenceable. So now we're going to do playtime. You all have cards that you thought were for questions, but you are sadly wrong. You are in tables by 3s, so I want you to get together with your table mates, and we're going to write a limerick, which is a really constrained poem. So there was an old man of Calcutta who coated his tonsils in butter, thus converting his snore from a thunderous roar to a soft oleaginous mutter. The code of conduct is, in effect, do not attempt to rhyme anything with bucket. I'm going to give you all a little time. So there are 5 lines. 1, 2, and 5 rhyme, and 3 and 4 rhyme with each other. I'm not going to make you try and do the cadence and the foot and no, we're not going to do that. Just do the rhymes if you can. And I'm going to give you a few minutes to work with your people because it'll be more fun in a group. I know, group projects are terrible. It'll be more fun to work on that in a group. And we're going to think about how strong typing affects your writing. So I'll leave that one up. Any limerick. Thank you. I'll give you a hint. There are online rhyming dictionaries. Yeah. Yeah, so rhyme the first two and last line. And so sort of the same pattern, but you can use any words to rhyme. I see you refusing. Yeah, just there's two rhymes.
But you're already writing first, second, and last.
Right.
Third and fourth. So we just write them down?
Yeah. Well, write the limerick down.
Oh.
Yeah. So once you find the words, find some other sentences to go around them. Does that make sense?
Oh, okay. Sure. So how many sentences do you have to write?
So just write one as a group, just 5 lines.
Okay.
I'm sorry, the instructions are obviously confusing. Good, use the internet. If you use Oregon, you have a lot more options than Portland. It's good to want things. All right, I know you are not all done. Hello. I know you're not all done, but we have to stop the project and you can work on it later. But I want you to think about how strong typing made that a much easier thing than me saying, I need you to come up with a poem. I want you to think about how strong typing is going to make documentation easier for you. Hire someone to build your type, pour some content into it, and your life will be much easier. So it turns out y'all have some core values here in Python land. Beautiful is better than ugly.
Yes.
So that's really important because beautiful is different than pretty. Pretty documentation means that somebody has spent time doing what we call font fondling. And that's where you get like deep into the weeds of beautiful CSS and you're like, oh, the white space and the kerning. Don't do that. That is pretty. I want you to write beautiful, and what is beautiful is clean and effective. All I want you to do is write something that works. Don't write something that looks good the first time. You can work on that later, but just write something beautiful because it works. Explicit is better than implicit. Please don't assume that everyone who is reading your documentation has the same set of knowledge that you do. If you have expectations about what people know, say that up front. Like, I expect you're a system administrator who knows how to run a command line. That's an important set of things to be explicit about. Simple is better than complex. Again, don't get too far into structuring it in a super ornate way. What you want to do is just make it accessible and usable. And by accessible, I mean you also need to run an accessibility linter on it. And there are a lot of good ones out there, and I completely blanked on the one I was going to tell you about, but if you type in A11Y, you will find a whole bunch of accessibility helpers because accessibility is too hard to type out, so we abbreviated it in an inaccessible way. Complex is better than complicated. If your procedure takes 27 steps, stop, break it down, make it smaller procedures. Because at that point, you've exceeded the human mind's ability to do complicated, and you need to stop and say, okay, this is complex. Installing a server is not a single task. It's 5 tasks that I can make smaller and atomize. Readability counts. I'm glad you guys understand that, folks. I'm glad you folks understand that because it's really important to me that people be able to read not just the code, but what you write. And avoid premature optimization. It is more important that you get stuff out there than that you get it lovely. And it's more important that you help one person than that you wait until you get it right for everyone. So don't prematurely optimize your documentation to be like the one true documentation. Just get something out there. So let's have some action items that you can take out of this and understand why Python applies to the tech writing that you are going to end up doing in your everyday life. Understand your needs and your users' needs. Hire specialists to do specialist jobs. I guarantee you it is cheaper to hire a writer to do writing than it is to hire a Java developer to do writing or a Python developer to do writing. It's just cheaper to hire specialists because they know what they're doing and they're faster at it. And as you know, every time you start up a new project, there's this huge overhead of learning how it works. Hire somebody who doesn't have that overhead for documentation. Start small and be organized about it. Don't just start small and put everything onto one page. Do a little metadata, do a little organizing, think about how it's going to be structured. Think about this talk and then go home and take one of the features that you're working on and do a little documentation about it. I'm talking under a page. Just what is it that you are assuming people know in order to use this? Take this talk back and say to yourself, how could I use this principle to make my documentation more Pythonic? And finish your limericks. I know that you all have them on cards. I'm not going to make you read them because, well, yeah, I know. But you can post them on Twitter and tag it PyDX, and I will see them all. But I want you to think about how we work in constraints to be super creative. So if this talk was too long and you read Twitter instead, write a doc. It's a lot like writing a Python. I am a tiny potato, and I believe in you. Am I still on? Okay. You can find me. All right. Where can we buy Lisa Frank shirts like yours? We got them at Rage On. Rage On, and they will spam you like, whoa. So just like order it and then like straight to the big bucket, because I do not need to buy a Lisa Frank shirt a day.
As somebody who contributes to a body of documentation that's over 6,000 pages, what would garbage collection for documentation look like? What would you do?
I think I would start in order of access. So I would put some analytics on, and I would see how often pages were getting hit. And if they weren't getting hit, I would dump them off the bottom. And if that would be the first stage. And the second stage would be if they're getting hit and people are bouncing really fast, you're not answering whatever question they're coming in with. So you need to dump those or rewrite them. And I think you could probably make a pretty big dent starting with those two techniques. And after that, I think you would look at what people go on to do, like their path. Because if they stay a long time and don't go anywhere else, you've probably still confused them and they're just giving up.
Do you know of any good open source data tooling?
Do I know of any good open source data tooling? No. It's like there's some that does it kind of. I think open source documentation tools as a whole are troublesome and problematic. I think now would be the time to ask Gorilla if they would do one or offer to help them build one. All right, y'all can find me later. Have fun.